Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to today's webinar, Finding Funding, an Expert Path to Grant Seeking, presented by the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. We encourage you to submit questions via the chat feature, whether joining us by streaming the audio over your computer or by phone throughout the presentation. Questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation as time allows. As a reminder, today's call is being recorded Wednesday, October 10. Today's speakers include Joan Bouchard, Senior Program Officer at the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, and Susan G. Zepeda, President, CEO of the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky. Please go ahead, Joan.
Thanks, Demetra. I'm Joan Bouchard, Senior Program Officer at the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky, and I want to thank you all for joining our call today. This is the 6th webinar in the Foundation's 2012 Health for a Change training series. This free series combines webinars and in-person workshops that are designed for emerging and established health coalitions doing the important work of fostering change in Kentucky. For those of you who may be new to the series, I want to begin with an introduction for the Foundation, which began in 2001 with a mission to address the unmet healthcare needs of Kentuckians. The Foundation does this through making grants and supporting research, convening stakeholders, and providing training and technical assistance through events like this one. We also provide policymakers with resources and information that they need to make decisions that impact the health of Kentuckians. The Foundation's 2 current initiatives are promoting responsive health policy and investing in Kentucky's future. These 2 initiatives will build on what we've done and learned over the course of the past several years. And although the Foundation has new initiatives, our commitment to supporting local coalitions with information and training resources remain. What may interest community coalitions is the request of proposals recently issued for investing in Kentucky's future. If you're interested and you haven't received the RFP, you can find it on the Foundation's website, which is www.healthy-ky.org. In a minute, today's webinar, Finding Funding, an Expert Path to Grant Seeking, will be presented by Dr. Susan Zepeda, the President and CEO of the Foundation. But before Dr. Zepeda starts the webinar, I want to remind you of the last 2 events in the Health for a Change series. Though this flyer and the slides difficult to read, you can find a readable copy of the complete training calendar on the Foundation's website. And there is still space available for the final workshop on October 31st. Presenters from the Center for Community and Health Education offer a hands-on workshop called Start with the End in Mind, a straightforward approach to evaluating your work. And the final webinar will be broadcast on November 14th. The title is How to Increase the Return of Investment from Your Social Media Campaigns. This will help you decide how to communicate using social media like Facebook, texting, Twitter, Pinterest, to either send public health messages or raise funds or encourage advocacy for your issues. You can register for either one of these events on the Foundation's website. So with that said, let's dive into today's webinar. Our speaker, Dr. Susan Zepeda, came to the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky in 2005 from Healthcare Foundation for Orange County, California. Prior to that, she was the director of the San Luis Obispo County Health Agency and the County Hospital. Dr. Zepeda is a member of the Kentucky Institute of Medicine Board, the Southeastern Council of Foundations, too. She has been on the board of Grantmakers in Health, the National Association of County and City Health Officials, County Health Executives Association, and the Rotary Club. She also served as a city planning commissioner, and she holds degrees from Brown University, the University of Arizona, and the International College. She's a graduate of the Public Health Leadership Institute and Harvard's program on negotiation for senior executives. Welcome, Dr. Zepeda.
Thanks so much, Joan. It's a pleasure to be here. Let's dive right into the content and think about your grant-seeking efforts and who might give funding for the kinds of work that you do. There's a list on this slide that starts with federal, state, and local government because Even though times are tough, they still often have more money to support health work than any other source. United Ways are a good source as well. Individuals, corporate foundations, national endowed foundations, and local and regional foundations of various kinds. And we'll be trying to sort out what these different kinds are and what that means for you. Starting, though, I'd like to say a few words about individuals. The August issue of the Chronicle of Philanthropy tells us that Kentucky ranks 15th in the nation in generosity, donating 4.8% of their discretionary income to causes that they deem worthy. For those of us who know health and know how low Kentucky can be in the health rankings, it's kind of nice to see that we're up there as 15th in philanthropy. When you think about individuals, they're more likely to make donations or gifts than grants, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Donations, just to give you a hint, are usually unconditional, and about 3/4 of giving in the U.S. is by individuals. When you think about Kentucky as an under-resourced state, it helps to remember that out there among us all is about $300 billion, that's billion with a B, in net worth of individuals living in the Commonwealth. And if an individual supports your mission, he or she will often give year after year after year. So we encourage you to cultivate relationships with individuals because their donations are great. Well, a few words about government, and it will just be a few. But right now, there's special opportunities for funding that are available under the Affordable Care Law, sometimes known as Obamacare. There's lots of detail down in the weeds about ways in which they're trying to fund innovative new programs. And even before the Affordable Care Law, there were opportunities for reimbursement for services from Medicare, Medicaid, K-CHIP. If you're in the direct service delivery business, there are entities that purchase slots or service capacity. There are pass-throughs of legislative appropriations from federal to state to county or city governments, and there are competitive grant awards. And then, of course, there are foundations. Excuse me. The Kentucky Foundation Data Book in the 4th edition indicated there are 1,172 foundations in Kentucky, and the top 216 had assets of about $1.58 billion. That's about $1.5 billion. And that amounts to over 8,000 individual grants being made during the year, or a total of $125 million for the year in grants, with the average grant fairly modest at just over $15,000. If you're wondering where those grants go, the lion's share, nearly a third, go to education, 13% to the arts, and not nearly as many, about 8%, go to health. It's also important to remember that not all the grants made in Kentucky are made by Kentucky foundations. There were more than 1,000, more than 1,400 grants to Kentucky organizations from foundations in other states, and they awarded over $114 million in grants here in that 2007 year. Little dusty, but it's one of the most recent for which we have that kind of data. You're probably wondering, well, how do I reach these amazing foundations who want to give money for things that I'm doing? And the short answer in today's world is that websites are wonderful. They're a great way to find annual reports, grant application forms, giving priorities, contact preferences. Would they rather be called or get an email or get a letter? One particular great website for learning down deep about a foundation is guidestar.org. Every foundation above a very modest amount has to file either a federal 990 or a 990 PF if they're a private foundation. And you can get into the details of that 990 and learn what organizations they've made grants to and how much those grants consisted of. That helps you understand better if you're barking up the right tree. Some of the national foundations that give in Kentucky, I won't read you the list. We're all aware of the work that the Annie E. Casey Foundation has done here, and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and other large funders and their websites are listed on this frame. So if you want to know about what they're giving, you go to their website. Here's Annie Casey's as a good example. And usually, and here's some more detail from Annie Casey. Here's Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and one of their initiatives. Foundations really like to make sure you get to the right door, and so they often tell a lot on their website about what they're looking to fund, what they have funded, and what their mission is and what their intentions are in funding a particular grant initiative. That helps you get lots and lots of detail to figure out if what they're wanting to fund is what you're wanting to do. Here's a list of some local funders. Many of them have websites. Again, explore at your will and at your leisure. Down at the bottom of the list, it says your community's foundation here. Don't forget that there are many small community foundations in Kentucky today, particularly since the legislature created an incentive for creating new foundations in under-resourced areas. Those may be under the wing of the Bluegrass Community Foundation or the Community Foundation of Louisville, or a foundation out in western Kentucky, or the Foundation for Appalachian Kentucky. But those community foundations can be a resource, particularly targeting your geographic area. Some of you may be surprised that I've included the Health Foundation of Greater Cincinnati, but their giving area includes several counties in northern Kentucky, and they're a resource as well. Well, where does all this money come from, you may ask, and why should we care? It's really important to know whether the funds that you're pursuing come from family wealth, corporate generosity, conversions, not a religious experience, we'll talk more about that later, or community foundations, because they each have different outlooks and different constraints. Family wealth comes from, as I call them, Mr. and Mrs. Wealthy, either alive or passed on, who want to leave a legacy in their community. Usually, they put some constraints on the gift that establishes the foundation's endowment, so that they'll change a part of the world that they want to change. It may be education. It may be preserving the environment. It may be that they want to give in Kentucky and also in Louisiana, because their family has roots in both those places. Whatever the guidelines they create for the foundation through their endowment, subsequent administrators of that foundation have an obligation to stay true to the donor's intent. What that means is if Mr. and Mrs. Wealthy wanted to give all their money to improving the environment, unless you can create a link between the work you're proposing and somehow improving the environment, please go look elsewhere. Corporate generosity. There are many corporate foundations and foundations with corporate names on them. They may be endowed and fairly independent from the corporation whose name they bear, or they may get an annual allocation, which is often a percentage of profits from the foundation. There may be an overlay on their giving of a desire to polish their corporate image by showing that they care about the communities in which their corporation has a presence. Their giving would be aligned with corporate values, not to state the obvious, but if you've got a foundation that gets its resources from the sale of tobacco products, they're less likely to be enthusiastic about curbing tobacco use than other funders might be. Another important thing to remember when you knock on a corporation's door and they say they don't have any more money in their grant-making program is there are other ways that corporations support your good work. Sometimes they'll offer sponsorships from the marketing budget because having their banner up at your conference reaches an audience they want to reach. Sometimes larger corporations have very intentional programs for their staff to volunteer in the community. So if you're building something or knocking on doors or holding activities that would benefit from that kind of organized volunteer work, that's a great resource to remember as well. And last but not least, there are in-kind donations of merchandise. If you're building a new wing on your building and you're going to put in sweat equity if someone else can put in building supplies, or if you run a program for new mothers who might benefit from those open packages of diapers that a supermarket or larger box store can't sell because they've been opened or damaged, it may be a way to win-win. They get to write off as a charitable donation that product that they're not able to sell, and you get to put it to good use in your program. So when they say no to the grant ask, let that be the beginning of a conversation about how else you might work together. Conversions are a very particular kind of foundation. Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky is one of those. They happen, and they happen a lot in the health domain, when a nonprofit health entity becomes a for-profit. Hospitals, clinics, health systems sometimes need access to capital that they feel they can only get in the for-profit environment, and so they either sell or change their structure. And in those cases, part of the proceeds of the sale may be set aside to carry on the charitable mission of the former nonprofit entity. Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky was created when Anthem acquired Blue Cross Blue Shield here in Kentucky. The common law that governs this action is sometimes called cypre, which is just Old French for as close as possible to that original mission being carried on. Often the government gets involved when those sales and transfers and creations of foundations occur, and the government of that jurisdiction may place special requirements on the newly formed foundation for transparency of the work they do, and certainly for accountability to the people of the area who are to be served by these proceeds. Just a word about operating foundations, actually a few of them. Private foundations that use most of their income to provide charitable programs of their own, to provide those programs directly, give few, if any, grants to outside organizations. Good examples of that, organizations doing good work in the health arena, would be the Kaiser Family Foundation and the Commonwealth Fund. And while they might fund targeted research to advance their policy work, they're unlikely to issue a broad request for proposals the way, for example, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation might. This is another case where looking hard at the website and the work that they do can give you an idea of whether they have funds that they'd be interested in giving to your cause. Community foundations, I've mentioned them before because there may be one in your community that would be good to befriend. One of the things about community foundations is you can't judge how many dollars they would have available to give to you by how many dollars they have under their roof. Very often, community foundations are a wonderful combination of lots of small foundations or funders gathered together to share back office expenses. And so it's almost like going to 50 or 60 or 70 family foundations under one roof. As a result, community foundations can have very little discretion to address newly identified community needs because they're as tied to the donor's vision as a larger family foundation might be. But the wonderful thing about community foundations, or one wonderful thing I should say, is their staff are often very good at matching donor intent with community nonprofits. So it's very much worth the call and the contact to get to know the staff of those community foundations and explore whether any of the funds they oversee might be a good match for the work that you're doing. Again, how do you get some of this money that's enticingly out there in Kentucky and the nation? It's all about matching what you want to do to foundations who want to do that. I list just a few examples here. Some foundations are all about what we call bricks and mortar. They want to build a building or a wing and put their founder's name on that building, so their good works will be known for many years to come. Others may want to invest in capital equipment, but not in buildings, not in programs. Others may want to invest in programs and projects, but say they absolutely won't fund buildings. And some, very rarely, as the Foundation for a Healthy Kentucky has done, will offer what's called general operating support. That's as close to a gift as a grant probably ever gets, where we say we like your good work so well that we want to fund your ability to continue to do that good work. Odd as it may seem, we've talked about looking at websites and talking to community foundations. The best place to start in your search for a new grant is inside yourself. So turn that scope on your picture the other way and take a long, hard look at who you are, what you want to accomplish, why you need resources from outside to get that job done, how exactly you're going to get from where you are to where you need to be, and when will it happen? Is this something your board wants to do over 5 years or 10 years, or do they want it done yesterday and you're really under the gun to find rapid funding? Once you know what you want to do and what it will cost, the search begins. As I said, back to basics. Who's funding this kind of thing? Google is your friend, or Yahoo, or Ask, or any of those other wonderful search engines. Who is funding what you want to do, and who's funding it at the kind of level that you need to be funded? I mentioned that the average grant in Kentucky foundations is just over $15,000, but some are quite a bit higher, and some are only in the $1,000 or $2,000 range. So if you know you've got a project with a $200,000 price tag, you're either putting grants from multiple entities together, another kind of challenge, or you're looking first for foundations that do fund at that level. And again, you go back to those websites, annual reports. Chronicle of Philanthropy, both online and their print edition, is a wonderful place where funders announce their intentions to the world. So look in those small print back pages of the Chronicle of Philanthropy for hints on who's doing grant making that's down your alley. Foundation Center is a good resource as well. The Center for Nonprofit Excellence in Kentucky has a lot of in Louisville, Kentucky, I should say, has a lot of the Foundation Center resources, and good old GuideStar and the federal 990s, where people tell all to the federal government, and you get to read what they've said about who they fund and how much they spend doing it. So as you're looking through these funders and learning more about them, they tend to have certain characteristics. One that's probably most important is whether they do their grant making by what's called an initiative, or whether their grant making is responsive, which is code for they don't make up the rules, they read with interest whatever comes through the door. So are they driving the bus, or are they watching what comes through and picking good buses to get on? What is their funding cycle? If you contact them in May and they made their grants in March, you're going to have a long time to wait before they fund again. So be aware of the funding cycles when you start making your asks and submitting your proposals. When you respond to a request for proposals, again, foundations vary. A friend of mine likes to say, if you've seen one foundation, you've seen one foundation. Some of us have moved online with our application processes. Others still prefer to get their proposals on paper. Some prefer to get a letter of inquiry before you go to the trouble of writing a full proposal and they go to the investment of reading it. Some of them like a phone call. Some of them say, don't call at all. Please just send us something in writing. Whatever they do, they're trying to tell you the best way to knock on their door. While you're doing your research, again, what you're looking for is that good fit between what you are wanting to do and what they like to fund. So you do get into the weeds about what their mission is, what their goals are, and the strategies they say they like to use to realize their mission and their vision. Their priorities will tell you what they like to fund to achieve those goals. And again, there's that list. Is it demonstration projects, convenings, bricks and mortar, operating expenses, scholarships and fellowships? Some foundations love those, others stay away from them. Or are they upstream doing research and doing publications rather than funding on-the-ground demonstration projects or advocacy work? Another word about grants versus donations. I mentioned this in my pitch at the start about the value of the individual donors to your organization. Donations are gifts that may or may not be designated for a specific purpose. Sometimes when a friend writes a check, they say they want it to be used for a particular project or a particular conference or particular activity. Donations are charitable. The people who make those donations want to feel good about what they've done in supporting your work. They're often unconditional, no strings at all attached. Just do that good work. And they often come from individuals or groups who passionately care about the work that you do. Grants, by contrast, have often quite specific goals and objectives. They have reporting requirements. Grants come with expectations. The fiduciary responsibility, the financial responsibility of the board and staff of the foundation is to be sure that the funds they're shepherding are used for exactly what they were intended for. So be sure you know what those expectations are and be sure you can meet them. When you tell the story of your project on whatever proposal response you're sending, whether it's a letter of intent, whether it's an online application, a particular response to a very specific request for proposals, you're typically telling a story about your project or your work. Again, this is a project proposal, and it usually, I say it's a poem, pardon the spelling. You're going to tell them what the problem or need is that your organization wants to address, the objectives, specifically what you aim to accomplish, the methods or the approach you'll use to accomplish that, and the evaluation, how you'll know you've made a difference. And it's a poem plus a budget because everybody will want to know what it will cost. Even though the OME plus the budget is the content of almost all the applications you're going to write for project support, everyone has a little bit different way they ask you for them. And your job is to fit your poem to their guidelines. I always tell people, follow the grant application requirements exactly. The creativity is in the what you're doing, not in the how you're talking about it. So if they offer topic heads, they offer a specific order of presentation to put the materials in, do just that. Use their same topic heads, use some of their same language, use religiously the same order of presentation they've requested, and don't leave anything out. Leaving things out can often get your proposal rejected at the staff level before the people who have the money to give out even get to see it. I think it sometimes helps to be aware that very often in a foundation, the people reading your proposals and making those decisions are volunteers. They're board members, community members helping out the foundation. And they're reading your proposal after work, on the weekends, late at night, They're going through a lot of proposals. And if they have to scrounge around and look to see where your objectives are, where your methodology is, they may not take the extra time to find it if you've put it in an innovative place. When you're seeking grant funding from a foundation, it helps a great deal to be a nonprofit. Most philanthropy involves giving to 501c3 nonprofit organizations. You'll know you are one if you have an IRS determination letter that says you're a 501c3, not a 4 or some other designation. You could be a governmental entity. Foundations vary in their willingness to work with governments, but very often health funders are open to that. And foundations can also give to religious organizations. They don't usually give to for-profit entities or other private foundations, although there's a way to do that with something that's called line item responsibility. That means they're going to be poring over your books and leaning over your shoulder much more. That's why we say find or be a nonprofit, because if you're a member of a coalition that's going after a grant, it often helps to have a nonprofit entity be the entity that's your fiscal agent and writing the grant and overseeing the work to be done with that foundation's gift. Writing successful proposals. This is part of a list that's a few years old but still worth hearing about. We've talked about doing your homework and how to do it, following directions. Again, the middle of the night readers, have pity on them. Please be concise. More is not better. Whatever you might think, they really don't throw it against the wall and see how loud a noise it makes. Clarity counts. Write to communicate and not to impress. And drop the jargon and lose the acronyms. I like to say, imagine that you're coming home for a great big Thanksgiving dinner, and there's your Aunt Matilda. She's a college graduate. She loves you, but she doesn't know a lot about what you do. How would you describe your work to her? Foundation boards are often filled with very caring Aunt Matildas who want to be helpful, but they just may not know the jargon or the background specific to the work you're doing. When in doubt, pass it by an editor, somebody who may not know your work, and ask them to read it and give you honest feedback about whether it's clear, whether it's concise, and whether an educated lay reader would understand it. Some of the things that are helpful, again, in successful proposals are demonstrating collaborative efforts, or at least being aware of who else is out there doing similar work and explaining to people why your work fills an unmet need in the community. If you pretend that you're the only one doing your kind of work and your readers are aware of other entities working in the same vein, they'll simply think that you're not adequately informed about your community or the field. So recognize and seek to collaborate. Practice truth in asking. There used to be a fashion of pumping up your budget to ask for twice as much as you needed because, oh, those foundations are only going to cut my budget in half anyway. The reality is that the people who are reading your proposal have a pretty good idea of what things cost. And if they sense that you're asking twice as much for that desktop computer as you can get it for, they will suspect your other numbers as well. Think about what you're doing as a blueprint for what you do if you're funded. Milestones, accountability measures, and show a potential for future sustainability, your ability to carry on the program after you've been funded and the funding ends. As I said, these are not new. These came from Linda Long in her article called The Inner Secrets of Successful Proposals in Foundation News and Commentary, way back in April of 2000. They're just as true today as they were when Linda wrote them. Digging down a little deeper, if there's a request for proposals, as opposed to just an open ask, read it through. If there's a session online or in person for applicants, be there and ask questions until you're sure you know enough to tell your board and the other staff of your foundation whether this is a good match and a good opportunity. If not, call or email questions, whichever the RFP says they prefer. Because it's your job, before you even write those first words, to decide if this is a good fit for your organization, for your project, and for your capabilities. Yes, we're having a side conversation here. Sorry about that. Again, the poem and the budget, in their order, in their terms. What is your problem statement? It's telling people what it is that your good work is going to do. What's the problem in your community? Why does it matter? What's the impact of this problem not being addressed? And provide the best data you can, as close to your community as you possibly can, and as recent as you possibly can. What do you hope to accomplish? Be very specific, like the Journalism 101 class you might have taken in college. You need to tell the who, what, where, and when. Platitudes don't work. They need to share your vision and align with your vision and understand what it is you're seeking to accomplish. Get down to the gritty. How will you meet your objectives? Is there an evidence base to this approach? That just means that other people have done it and proven that it works. If there is that kind of an evidence base, or even enough to suggest this might be a promising practice, cite that with chapter and verse and journal articles, whatever it might take, to let people know that you've done your homework and that you're suggesting a strategy for your community that has worked well in other places. As I mentioned before, are there others working on this problem? If there are, recognize that, name it, and then tell how your approach is different, why your approach is better, and why that organization and your organization both need to do the work they're doing in your community. Get as specific as you can in the pages that they'll allow about your timeline, your milestones, your action plans. It may be called different things, but it's the steps for getting from here to there. Another thing you'll need to make sure that your foundation that you want to have fund you understands is why you, other people are sending in proposals. Your project may be different. It may be similar. What gives your foundation, what your organization the edge that would make someone want to invest in you? Tell a little bit about the history of your organization, what its mission is, what it's accomplished. Credentials of your key staff are a help. If you have positions that are unfilled that would be filled with the grant money, give a job description. Let them know who's on your board, because that's who's watching the shop. What's your financial condition? They may ask for your 990, your audited financials. Be sure to share that, because it'll give them a clearer sense of the size of your organization and to some extent how well you manage the funds you already have. And of course, that IRS determination letter or other designation that shows that you're one of the kinds of nonprofits that they can work with, which could include a government or a church. Evaluation, and this should relate back to your methods and objectives. Be as clear as you can about it. And this means going beyond saying, we'll work with an evaluator to develop an evaluation. You'll want a little bit of a process evaluation that tells you and your board as well as your funder if you did what you set out to do. And then you'll want outcome evaluation to let you know if the work you did accomplished what you hoped it would. These kinds of evaluation are so important both for steering your own ship, your own coalition, or your own organization, as they are for reporting to an external supporter. I mentioned a couple of kinds of things at the bottom of this frame, internal versus external evaluation. That's just a fancy way of saying whether you do the evaluation yourself inside your organization with the staff and volunteers you already have, or whether you contract for somebody outside your organization who may be seen as more objective or more knowledgeable about evaluation. There's a price tag usually associated with those external evaluations, but for some funders, they give added credibility to the results of the evaluation. And also say a little bit about the methodology that you're going to be using. That tells them that you get it about evaluation, and you're not just making vague statements about evaluation. You're actually prepared to ask questions, get answers, and evaluate the work you're doing. We've said a little bit about the budget. Be realistic. Know the cost of things. You may need to open a few catalogs or make a few calls to be sure that your budget is a realistic budget. Also know, again, about your funder, what's allowed and what's not. Do they let you fund overhead? Do they put a cap on it? 5%, 10%, 20%? Will they let you use the funds to replace funding you already have and use that other funding for something else? Or will they say that they won't supplant existing funding? An example of what supplanting means is if you already have a board-approved budget that pays Jane's salary 100% and you're putting Jane 50% on this proposal, how sound were the dollars that were supporting Jane? Was the board expecting you to get this grant to fund her salary, or was it hardwired from another source of funding? If it was hardwired, then you would be supplanting if you put grant money in where money had already been allocated. Some funders care about that, some don't. Some don't like you to pay for anything that happened before the grant funded period, which means not paying the grant writer out of the grant. Again, others don't particularly care either way. Construction, equipment, media. There are still some funders who say, we will not fund a video. Do not ask us. Pay attention to that, because there are funders who will. It's rare to find a grant from a foundation that's expressly designed to get you out of a financial hole. There are some, but by and large, that's your passionate donors who care about your cause, who write the checks that help you get out of debt. And most funders will say, no lobbying with the dollars that we get. Certainly federal funders say that. Private foundations say that because they have constraints on themselves around their ability to lobby. And I want to say a few words here about the difference between lobbying and advocacy, because there's a great deal you can do to educate and inform and convene without specifically asking people to vote a certain way on a certain bill, which is the narrow definition of lobbying. So don't be put off if they say no lobbying. Ask about advocacy and where they stand on that. There again, no lobbying tango, know the rules. The Alliance for Justice has wonderful materials that can help you share with your board where the line is between advocacy and lobbying. Strength in numbers, something to be aware of. If your organization, your nonprofit, does engage in lobbying, it helps to take Federal Election H under the IRS tax code, so you can actually track the dollar amounts you're spending on lobbying and assure yourself and your board and your donors that you're not spending more than the allowed amount on that activity. General operating support is helpful if you're working in the arena of advocacy and policy change, so you may want to especially look for funders who are interested in that work. And measuring progress is a particular challenge in advocacy. Some evaluation entities, like the Center for Community and Health Evaluation that Joan mentioned is doing another training for the foundation, are particularly skilled at helping you measure your progress when you take on the hard work of advocacy. When foundations partner with each other, a good example at the national level is the Convergence Partnership that's working together to have healthier people in healthier places, particularly to take on the policy level challenges about obesity in America. Or our own foundation's challenge grants, where we reach out to community foundations and offer to match dollar for dollar their work on health policy aligned with our mission. Or the Shaping Kentucky's Future collaborative here in Kentucky, which is a coalition of about half a dozen funders also working on nutrition, physical activity, and built environment policy. When foundations partner, that means multiple cooks are stirring that broth, and they have to get together and figure out as a group what it is that they're looking for and what it is that they're funding. And often they do that through a formal request for proposals that each of their boards has bought into or signed off on. There's a lot of jargon in the world of philanthropy. We truly recognize that. Capacity building, sustainability, collaboration, community-based work, accountability, outcomes. What does it all mean? Capacity building is often an investment that a funder makes in you, as well as the grant dollars that they give you. The training series our foundation funds is an example of an effort to help build the capacity of hardworking health organizations around the Commonwealth and health coalitions to learn better how to do some essential skills to help along the work that you do. Sustainability, many funders believe that they're helping you launch something new, and they don't want to help you launch that something new unless they think it has a hope of continuing after that revenue stream ends. This is a dance that funders dance with grant seekers. Unfortunately, the answer, "we'll get another grant," is usually not what the funder is looking for when they have a conversation with you about sustainability. They want to know what the revenue stream is that's going to keep this good work going. Is it donations? Is it fees that people pay to use your services? Is it a combination of those and a golf tournament and a bake sale? Or maybe the work is sustained by policy change, because if Medicaid changed what they paid for, then the work that you've done on a pilot basis could be done not just by your own organization, but by others, for as long as that change stays in place. Collaboration, networking, partnering, bringing together stakeholders. That's all a way of saying that foundations believe that it helps to look around your community and see other people who may want to work on the work you're doing. Interestingly and not surprisingly, collaboration may be a pathway to sustainability, because each of the groups in your community who wants to keep this work going may be able to put a little bit on the table to keep it going after your pilot project demonstrates that it really does make a difference. Community-based is a phrase we throw around a lot in philanthropy. At one level, it's as opposed to ivory tower. That means we want ideas that come from the community, that the community that's going to be impacted by the good work you're doing has bought into the changes that you're proposing. Nothing about us without us has become a common phrase for that. And it's really different from the days I remember long ago when university academics would write a proposal, send it into the federal government or a national funder, and not even approach the community they were going to be, quote, helping, unquote, until they knew they got the grant. So this is turning that on its head and saying, start with the community, be of the community and with the community, and be sure the people you're wanting to help want what you have to offer. Accountability is all about assuring the funder that you will be able to do what you said you would do, that you'll measure and track what you're doing, and that there's somebody minding the store. Again, that's that board of directors. Let's hope it's not your brother, your sister-in-law, and your best friend, but some objective people, preferably people who represent that same community that you serve, who can oversee your work at the policy level and make sure it's headed in the right direction. Outcomes, again, that's the evaluation piece, and as specific as you can be in your proposal to a funder about what it is that you're hoping will happen, how many people you'll impact, how much you'll move the needle in the change that you're seeking, and what your time frame is for that. And be realistic about it. You won't move mountains in 12 months. If their funding is only for a 12-month period, say that you're going to start digging some of the dirt at the bottom of the mountain, and why that makes a difference and why that's important, and how you know when that change happens. We asked you not to talk in jargon. We know we do. And we apologize. And about all we can say about that is once you've read the request for proposal or visited the website, if you're still not sure what a funder means by empowerment or innovation or leverage or best practices, contact them in whatever way they say to be contacted, whether it's email or a phone call or a visit, to help understand and be sure that what they're asking for is something your organization can deliver and wants to deliver. Here's a list of some things that foundations care about in the health area today. I've mentioned a few of them already along the way. Obesity, also known as healthy eating and active living. The impacts of the Affordable Care Law and health reform generally on populations and delivery of service. Access to care for people who have a hard time getting access to care, whether it's because of their limited financial means or their rural isolation or speaking a different language. Health equity, leveling the playing field for people who need care. An aging health workforce. And some also care about more specific issues like dental health or AIDS or end-of-life care or finding new cures for diseases. Do that search. Read the website. Read the annual report. Read the 990 and see what they've funded. See if there's any hope that what they've funded before aligns with what you want them to fund next. Some more, there's hopeful signs of willingness to get involved in advocacy, and something called mission-related investment, where funders may give loans instead of grants to worthy organizations. Our own foundation, for example, will offer loan guarantees to grantees for that bricks-and-mortar capital construction that we don't fund through grants. Some fund media education efforts, and some still don't want to go there. Oh, the print is tiny, but hopefully you can read it. Lots of useful websites to continue this conversation about grant making and grant seeking and help grant maker and grant seeker meet in the middle to move forward health policy, health advocacy, and positive health change here in Kentucky. Now, Joan, I think you may have been tracking some questions. And
I do. We have a few minutes for questions. Demetra, will you give the attendees directions for submitting questions over the phone?
Certainly. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to register for a question, please press the 1 followed by the 4 on your telephone. You will hear a 3-tone prompt to acknowledge your request. If your question has been answered and you'd like to withdraw your registration, please press the 1 followed by the 3.
Go ahead.
Meanwhile, we do have one question about the availability of the slides and the webinar. As all our webinars have been put on our website, this one will also. It'll probably be the beginning of next week, but the webinar will be there for you to watch again if you would like and listen to, or your colleagues or anyone else you would like to recommend it to, and the slides will be available at that time also.
At www.healthy healthy-ky.org.
And Susan's been nice enough to put her email up on the screen so that if you do have questions that are not answered today or something you think of after the webinar is over, you can submit them to her. Demetra, do you have any questions on the call?
There are no questions registered on the phone lines.
Okay, well, as Joan said, if you think of a question when you're sharing this information with a friend, please just let us know. Shoot an email to szepeda@healthy-ky.org, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks for your interest.
We do have one question that's just come in. The question is, any suggestions for those of us who were unfortunate enough to get our application to IRS for 501c3 status changed to a 501c6 status?
The short and easiest answer is find a friend. If you're part of a collaborative or a coalition working on the work that you're working on, that's a funny way to say it, if there's someone in your group who is a 501c3 organization or with a government entity that could be the lead organization for the work you're doing, collaboration and having them be the fiscal lead is the easiest way to get in the good graces of funders who are limited to funding 501c3 nonprofits or government.
We'll wait just a few more seconds, see if we have any other questions. Okay, well, if we have no more questions, this webinar, as I said, will be posted on the Foundation website, www.healthy-ky.org. And you can find Susan's email is in front of you. My email, I'm Joan Bouchard, is also on that site. So that's all we have for today. Thank you very much for all the attendees.
And thank you for the good work that you do.
Ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude the webinar for today. We thank you for your participation and ask that you please disconnect your lines.